Again and again, I find myself at the website for the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change, reading over the principles of Reverend Dr. King's Principles of Nonviolence. Every time I read them, I learn. Every time I read them, I notice again how deeply rooted Reverend Dr. King was in following Jesus and in the wisdom of other traditions that also teach nonviolence. This week, the principle that jumped out was number 2. Nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. 2 subcategories. The outcome of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The end result of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation. It is always worth reviewing the idea of the beloved community, as central as it is to Reverend Dr. King's thinking. The United Methodist Commission on Religion and Race wrote about it for us, saying, philosopher-theologian Josiah Royce first conceived the beloved community concept. Later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. popularized it during the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. King envisioned that the beloved community would be a global movement where the agape love of God would be the driving force to redemption and reconciliation, and a place where all people can share in the abundance of wealth in the world. In the beloved community, all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and dehumanization are eradicated and countered by a more inclusive, interdependent existence of people who live in nonviolent harmony with one another. That is, the beloved community is formed from the truths of our 1 Corinthians passage. The ways to move from systems of power over, oppression, and hierarchy don't tend to come from those who hold the power, engage in the oppression, and maintain the hierarchy. Rather, the wisdom to see how things work and why things don't work and what could be better tends to come from those disempowered, oppressed, and on the bottom of a hierarchy. The ones lowborn, foolish in the ways of the world, insignificant, weak. They're the ones most likely to listen to God, to respond to God's urgings, and to find new ways. The nonviolent social movements of Reverend Dr. King, Gandhi, and Jesus are notable to me in that they sought to eliminate oppression with love. They did not seek to eliminate oppressors, only oppression. They wanted to change relationships, not stop them. They saw that there is real power in community, in connection, in solidarity, in peace, world-changing power, and they used it, but not power over. Power with. There's the vision of the kingdom, or the beloved community. The way of God in the world is not power over, but power with. It is in humanizing all. It is in sharing abundant resources. It is in togetherness. This, I think, is also the real meaning of the salvation discussed in Isaiah. The historical idea was of return to hope, to freedom, to connection. But when it's looked at more carefully, it's clear that God is at work to move towards peace, the holistic well-being of each and all, towards joy for all, towards comfort, towards freedom from oppression. God's dreams get spoken a little differently in each time and place, but in Isaiah and Paul, Jesus and Gandhi and Reverend Dr. King, and hopefully in each of us, God's dreams resonate with the same underlying melodies and hopes and passions. God's passion is for all to be well together. As you may remember, Reverend Dr. King talked about the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism as forms of violence that exist in a vicious cycle. About poverty, he said, there is nothing new about poverty. What is new, however, is that we now have the resources to get rid of it. The time has come for an all-out world war against poverty. The well-off and secure have too often become indifferent and oblivious to the poverty and deprivation in their midst. Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. No individual or nation can be great if it does not have a concern for the least of these. Heavens. There's even less new about poverty now than when he said it. The existence of poverty within our nation is a choice our nation has made about its values, a choice that the Bible clearly disagrees with. We could house everyone, and we could do it for less money than it costs us to not house everyone, but we choose not to. We could feed everyone, and the impact on our society as a whole would be profound, but we choose not to. We could provide affordable, excellent healthcare for everyone, once again at lower cost than our current system. But we choose not to. As Ms. Bryce Covert summarized in a New York Times opinion piece this summer entitled, "There is a reason we can't have nice things." In a seminal 2001 paper, the economists Alberta Alesina, Edward Glaser, and Bruce Sarkadote tried to answer this very question. Why doesn't this country have a welfare system that looks like the ones in European countries, progressively taxing those with the most wealth to redistribute resources to those with the least? Economic differences, they concluded, don't explain it. But they did find that the racial fragmentation has played a major role in keeping us from those policies in a way it hasn't elsewhere. They also found that while Europeans see the poor as members of their own group, who are merely unfortunate, Americans see them as lazy others. American voters are less likely to demand that their leaders pass policies that help the least well off. Racial animosity in the U.S. makes redistribution to the poor, who are disproportionately Black, unappealing to many voters, they concluded. That is, our choices to allow people to struggle in poverty are interrelated with racism, like Reverend Dr. King said. The way I see it, at the center of all these evils and violence is the dehumanization of others, which means that every single movement towards compassion is a movement away from violence, away from evil, towards the beloved community. Compassion matters for each of us, for all of us, for the world that we want to make, for the world that God calls us to make. I subscribed to a newsletter from Emily Nagoski, who with her sister wrote, "Burnout, the Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle," which I would put on the required reading list for humans if I had the power to make such a thing. Last week, she entitled her email newsletter, "Burnout, you don't have to wait for the revolution to feel better." Her words were profound to me, and so I'm going to share them with you. She says that there are solutions to burnout, and they are neither the revolution nor self-care, but rather compassion. Speaking of society as a body, she says, we help the body learn not to treat parts of itself as the enemy. Just because a cell in our social body is different from us doesn't make it foreign or a threat. Its difference means that it plays a different role in our social body than we ourselves cannot play. And so we must protect it, because our own well-being within this social body depends on every different cell sustaining its well-being. We can't soothe the inflammation of the social body by attacking any part of it. No, the cure for burnout can't be some fantasy of revolution, nor is it the finger trap of self-care. It is simply care. It is all of us turning towards each other with kindness and compassion. When we see each other's exhaustion and overwhelm, we offer support without judgment. When we notice our own sense of inadequacy, we allow others to witness it and love us anyway. The cure is each of us declining to let the forces of racist, sexist, capitalist oppression stop us from loving the hell out of one another, come what may. She continues, and if you're worried I'm saying don't try to change the system, let's just be nice to each other while the world burns, I invite you to think bigger. Think outside of the boring dynamics of Force A acting against Force B, and so Force B retaliates with overwhelming power. Instead, imagine Force B transforms into a cloud, saturating Force A with peace until it deliquesces and releases into the natural soft flow of being human. Audre Lorde says, community is built on honoring our differences. She calls us to recognize difference as crucial strength. Audre Lorde says, without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. But community does not mean shedding our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. The cure is not self-care. The cure is simply care. All of us caring for each other by honoring our differences and loving one another because of them. That's it, dear ones. That's how we do God's work, how we build the kingdom, how we live the beloved community, how we follow Jesus, how we continue the work of Reverend Dr. King. We love the hell out of each other. We simply care, we honor our differences, and we love one another. May God help us do it. Amen.